Everybody?
Nope.
Hey,
now we're there.
live. Now we're live.
I
Okay.
just clicked it here, but it has to be there. So
Hello.
let me go over here and see if anyone's on here.
We'll see. I saw
Let's
Angie
see if there are
on
any
there.
peoples.
Angie's on there. Maybe
Oh,
not.
I don't see the peoples. Darn it.
All right. What did we do?
Oh, it's got to be logged in. I am logged in. I don't know.
Lori's there. Good evening. Hi, everyone from Ojai. Brian says hi.
I have to refresh the screen, I guess.
Okay. Okay. There we are. Okay. We got it now. Hey, guys. I see Angie and Lori and Robin and Brian. So thank you all for joining us. So
Now it has to log in again.
oh,
I did this once.
so are we here?
Yeah, it's just not. There we
Okay,
go.
There we are. Now
Wow,
we're
I had to do a lot of refreshing and everything else. Wow, good to see you guys. Oh, Pastor Paul logged in. It says
Pastor
6:54,
Paul,
or
yep.
that could be last night because their conversation's still there.
Oh, it is. We're here.
We're here though. Polly, Brian, Robin, Lori, yay!
Oh, Polly, yay! Thanks. So, yep, we made it.
Hey,
We
let's
made
click
it.
on the me. I'm glad to be here. Let us know you're here. Who's ready to study the Bible? Me. I like to click on those little things. Hi, Angie. How are you doing? How
Good.
is lovely Ohio?
Is it smoky where you are, Angie? 'Cause,
Yeah, so many
my
people.
sister in Connecticut said it looks like doomsday where she lives.
There's all the wildfires in Canada that are
Yeah.
causing all this particulates in the air and making the air look crazy, the sky look crazy. It does that around here too when there's
When there's
wildfires sometimes.
wildfires, yeah,
you come
so-
out and I'm like, are we on Mars? You know?
Yeah, that's what it looks like a Martian
The atmosphere looks
atmosphere.
orange and everything, so
Yeah.
very interesting.
So, well, thank you one and all for
Thanks,
joining
guys.
us. So, I'm not sure if Pastor Paul is live or not. I guess he is live. So
I don't know.
He must be, yeah. so
Maybe he's like
he's stalking us.
stalking. That's what they say. Maybe he's just stalking.
But we are here. We are
Oh,
here.
he's got a new green button. Online church in the
There
center.
we go.
Uh-oh, it's doing the flashy
Oh,
thing.
no.
Why are we getting flashy?
Now
Dang
we're
it.
doing the flashy thing. So,
Oh, is it plugged in over
So-
there?
oh, technical difficulties,
Look at the
technical
power.
difficulties every time. So.
Huh.
Sorry about the flashing. That's annoying. But we noticed last time this did this that it doesn't flash on the text, which is actually the most important part.
Yeah,
'Cause-
when we go to the screen
Yeah.
with the full screen.
So, yep.
Yeah, it's just the video camera.
Yeah.
But
so,
sometimes it means it's going to die or something.
So, hopefully not. So,
Hopefully not. Maybe I didn't restart the computer.
oh, okay. Well, I don't want to do that now. So,
Maybe that's what the problem
we are
is.
going to plunge forward, okay? And you might have to just pretend we're on the radio. Okay, Angie said, we're good. No smoke noticed today.
Oh, good.
Yeah, good.
Hi,
'cause,
Marie.
Yeah, so, hey, Marie's here.
Robin says, at least you're not frozen.
At least
yeah.
we're not frozen.
Exactly.
No, we're definitely not frozen. So,
Let
but
it
yeah.
go.
So, you'll recall that last week we looked at Leviticus Chapter 11, and it was a lot of dietary restrictions, and we didn't quite make it through the chapter, so
Oh,
we're going
no,
to finish
yeah.
up. There's just a few more things to talk about,
Tell you
but the
what.
basic premise, or I'm sorry, not premise, that's the wrong word. The basic
Theme?
outline of what God is saying is that don't eat predators, don't eat scavengers, and don't eat, things that could potentially be infectious or venomous or poisonous, which is always a good rule.
Yeah,
But-
and you're not eating, mostly you're not eating monogastric animals either, you know?
Yeah.
Like pigs. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
but,
that was the basics of it, and a lot of times it was said that was God was, and He was protecting the health of the nation, and there were many studies that showed that the health of the Hebrew peoples over the centuries was always generally better than that of the non-Jewish people, in part because of their dietary laws. But that wasn't the only reason. The main reason is that predators would eat blood. They would be involved with the spilling of blood. And God was jealously, and I mean that in a positive way, God was jealously guarding the blood, because it's foreshadowing Jesus' shed blood, which washes away sin. So there's that, and then the same thing with the scavengers eating dead, dying animals and interacting with blood and blood products. So just a few more verses in chapter 11, and then we'll move into chapter 12.
We ended at 32.
Yeah.
That's where we ended.
I think I'll
so
backtrack
that's where you're
a little
starting.
bit. Yep, that's where I'm starting
Yeah,
at 32.
that's where we ended last time.
So if y'all want to open your Bibles or bring up your devices, we will look at chapter 11, beginning with verse 32.
Okay, verse 32.
Yep.
Also, continuing on, anything on which one of them may fall, we're talking about a dead body. When anything on which one of them may fall, they are dead.
When?
Oh, I left off the word when. I'm like, what? Okay, try it again. Also, anything on which one of them may fall when they are dead becomes unclean, including any wooden article or clothing or a hide or a sack, any article of which use is made, it shall be put in the water and be unclean until evening, then it becomes clean.
Okay, and so we're talking about the fact that these were written at a time when they're living in tents, they're living in the wilderness, they're living in open conditions, I guess is a way of putting it. Lizards, insects, things of that nature could and even still do to this day get into the dwelling area, the living area, and could die or accidentally fall amongst the cutlery and the cookingware and clothing and things of that nature. And God is saying those things become unclean, ceremonially unclean, but because most of them are artifacts or implements of use, he's saying that they need to be cleaned. They need to be cleaned, and they're not cleaned until they're put in water and soaked, and then they become clean. So, which brings us into just a little aside, okay? Mm-hmm. Literally, I'm sure every single one of us has used the 5-second rule.
5-second rule.
when we drop something, right? 5-second rule, especially if you're a parent.
It's still clean if it's been there more than 5 seconds.
Especially if you're a parent. We've all put in the 5-second rule.
Type in the comments, how many seconds did you wait for your kids?
Right, right. And so, working on boats and stuff like that, you don't even want to know how many seconds were added on to that 5-second rule out on a boat or something like that. When I was doing that for a living. But anyway, this one professor, he put it this way: the 5-second rule is a significant oversimplification of what actually happens when bacteria transfer from a surface to food. Bacteria can contaminate instantaneously. Now, as an interesting aside, a few universities did, and this is just kind of a fun, trivial thing for today, a few universities, they did some further studies, and what they found is that the drier the food object is, so think like biscuits, cookies, things of that nature, the 5-second rule can actually apply to them. They pick up the least amount of bacteria. So, but the moister something is, think cheese, bologna, vegetables, things of that nature. The moister an object or a food item is, the quicker and the more significantly the bacterial contamination is. So it's just kind of funny that God instructs the people. It's like yeah, if something dead falls on it, it's unclean. You got to clean it. There's no 5-second rule. Okay. Now he breaks it out even further. Really, we're getting a call from Scam Likely. So put that phone on vibrate. Okay, so Gay's trying to figure out why the flashing is happening. But here we go, verse 33.
As for any earthware vessel into which one of them may fall, whatever is in it becomes unclean, and you shall break the vessel. Okay. So totally important to not use it if it's gotten contaminated with a dead carcass.
Right,
We're
and
talking
keeping
about
in mind that
carcasses.
these would have been thrown pots, clay pots, and things of that nature, perhaps fired, glazed, maybe not. If they, especially if they were unglazed, they're very porous. Um, uh, Water containers were intentionally left unglazed so that there was a cooling effect by evaporative processes. So they would have been contaminated and not easily cleaned. So God's instruction was they have to be thrown away. They have to be thrown away. So and now with the luxury of modern science, we know that this makes a lot of sense. This is actually quite ahead of its time.
Right, definitely.
Because even as recently as like
Move that cable.
the 1700s, it was not uncommon for people to use a board called a trencher board, which is basically just a shaped, elongated bowl as their plate. And at the end of the night or at the end of the meal, it would simply be scraped and just set aside, perhaps washed, perhaps not. So, and lo and behold, many people got sick. Cholera was running rampant through the European countries at that time. So, verse
Right.
34.
Right, so God was really protecting the Jewish people with
Right.
this. That's what we've said before. This whole book of Leviticus, and as we go into Numbers and Deuteronomy and even Exodus, there's lots of do's and don'ts. God setting up the law and His covenant with His people, but within the do's and the don'ts, there's a lot of information and actually things that we now find, even scientifically, how much it protected and the Israelites. And it's interesting because it's like, oh, don't do this, don't do that, but they didn't know anything about germ theory, like we said last week.
Right.
So they didn't know how germs were transferred, like Dan said with the 5-second rule. So but by doing what God is putting forth here, it protected the Israelites from lots of food poisoning, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So verse 34, any of the food which may be eaten on which water comes shall become unclean, and any liquid which may be drunk in every vessel shall become unclean.
So this is again, if the food source or the tableware is contaminated, or if an animal falls into a water jug or a water pot or a bowl that has liquid in it, it's considered unclean. Again, a very wise precaution. Verse 35.
Moreover, everything on which part of their carcass may fall becomes unclean. An oven or a stove shall be smashed. They are unclean and shall continue as unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern collecting water shall be clean, though the one who touches their carcass shall be unclean. So
this is just a reality of life in the desert, that cisterns or springs. Cisterns would be dug wells made specifically to hold water, and inevitably creatures would fall into it. But the idea would be that the volume of water and the surrounding rock would filter the water. And springs, of course, are flowing water, and so that they would be rendered clean because movement of the water would clean them.
right, that's what I was going to say, because the water is continuously going through, so they're not just a little isolated pot or something. So it's got a source of continuous clean, fresh input. But like a pot or a closed off cistern or something, plus you don't really know how long it's been there.
Right.
So unless you knew, like, oh, I just filled that yesterday, but you could, they had cisterns of water, stored up for them to use, or pots, different, not cistern, but pots, so those, and be like, oh, I get the pot out that's got some water in it for us to use for cooking or bathing or whatever they're going to do that day, and there's a dead mouse carcass in it or a dead lizard carcass.
Yeah.
But you don't know how long it's been there. So again, the 5-second rule, if you're going to apply that, you can't really apply that. So
Right.
so it's just better to, consider that contaminated, even just from a medical, biological perspective.
Now, interesting aside, when I lived on St. Kitts in the Caribbean, I lived on St. Kitts, the island, of course, we talked about this previously. The island was hit by a hurricane, and the drinking water supply was actually the crater of the island has a dormant volcano on it, and their natural reservoir is the crater of that volcano, and it sits high above literally everything else on the island. But after the hurricane hit, we were, of course, we were drinking mostly bottled water when we could find it. But one of the locals, he told me, and I think he was serious. He was not joking. He said, "Oh, well, after we get hit by a hurricane, the government sends a team up to the reservoir, and they pull out the dead monkeys, and then the water filters down through the volcanic rock, and it's perfectly safe." So
Yikes.
I was thirsty. I drank it. I'm still here. I guess I'm okay. So anyway.
Yikes. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's relying on nature to do what nature's going to do. Robin asks, could kings require taste testers like Nehemiah? Could kings requiring taste testers like Nehemiah actually be dying from food poisoning and not deliberate poisoning? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, could definitely be both.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Like when we see that in movies and stuff, we're like, oh, this person had the, you're thinking all the king's enemies were always trying to poison him, but actually the cooks could have been accidentally poisoning the king. So, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and if we study ancient culinary practices, they weren't always the best.
Right.
So, especially in medieval England, or not England, but medieval Europe, actually, there was this very popular trend for a while of putting one animal inside of another animal, inside of another animal, inside of another animal, like putting a chicken inside of a goose, inside of a swan, inside of a pig, and then, and allegedly cooking them all together. And yeah, there's just too much room for error for my taste. But anyway, so,
all right.
But we digress. Verse 37.
Now, if a part of their carcass falls on any seed for sowing, which it is to be sown, the seed is still clean. It is clean. But if water is put on the seed and a part of their carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. Again,
dry seed is relatively resistant to contamination. That's why grain and such can be stored in silos and things like that for very long periods of time. However, if moisture gets in there, then mold and mildew and contamination can spread throughout that grain store and be actually quite deadly. One of the things in vet school that they're always looking out for is when cattle ingest grain that's
moldy. Right.
Yeah.
Which comes from there being moisture on the grain.
Yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily mean there's a carcass on there, but just the flat out moldy grain is dangerous, but which has moisture in it, right?
Right.
Yeah. What's his name? Not David Guzik. I was just looking at that. Damian Kyle, the guy from Modesto, Calvary Chapel, Modesto. On this part, he was saying that that also it's just that when the seed is dry and hasn't had any moisture on it yet, it's not in an active state, and it's actually protected by a very hard outer layer. That's kind of the God's design of all seeds. There's an outer layer, and then the germinating part, or the part that holds the cells for the embryo, basically the cells for the egg, and the gametes are literally like inside it's an egg. The seed is an egg. It's the male and female reproducing particles of the plant have come together, and it is now protected inside that hard cover seed. But if there's water put on it, that has started to open up, and so like he's saying, then that allows for the bacteria or whatever is present on this carcass to actually get into the seed. And so then when that's sown into the ground, it could actually be a source of toxic things, bacteria or chemicals or something, because of that contamination. So yeah, very interesting how God already, isn't giving them a biology class on mold and fungus and
Didn't
yeast and
know.
how it works.
Didn't know you were gonna
but
get a
God's just saying,
microbiome
if
class,
it's
did you?
damp, if the carcass is on
Yeah.
it, then just throw it all away. Be safe. He's like, God's like, better safe than sorry. Right?
Verse 39.
Verse 39. So, also, if one of the animals dies, which you have for food, the one who touches its carcass becomes unclean until evening. So I think it's cool too that these are all not like, some of the other things that earlier on in Leviticus and even in Exodus, like if you do this, you're not only unclean, like you're out from the camp,
Right.
you're out, you're excommunicated, you're no longer part of this nation, part of this family.
Right.
But in this area, God's setting up, rules and, things for them to do that will keep them safe, keep them holy, and keep them being demonstrated as a set apart people.
Right.
And that's the whole point. Remember, the theme or the whole point of Leviticus is holiness.
Right.
God is a holy God. He's telling us, and he's telling his people at the time, but telling us today who he is, how he wants to be worshiped, how he chooses to be set apart, and how he wants us to be set apart.
Right.
By demonstrating that we follow after him. So some of this stuff, the surrounding people groups that they're going to start interacting with when they go around the desert and into the promised land, those people are going to be like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you throwing that away? I mean, it's an animal you normally eat for food. Just eat it. You found it dead in the field. It's food. It's dinner time, easy pickings. But again, these animals, we know, especially trained in veterinary medicine, we have a lot of training in these zoonotic diseases, which are diseases, bacterial or viral, that transmit from animals to man and man to animals. So consuming an animal that has been killed by some certain bacterial organisms will kill you and or make you very ill. So you definitely don't want to do that. And so God just tells people, don't do it without giving a biology lesson, right?
But they become ceremonially unclean, not morally unclean, just ceremonially
right.
unclean.
So that's what I was getting to. It's just a shorter period of time.
Right.
It's not leading to death or excommunication, but it's like, oh, you touch something, don't go around everyone else until you're cleaned up, and you stay away until basically it's a quarantine, so you make sure that you're not infected with whatever you touched, and then you can come back into the living with everyone.
Right.
It's pretty cool, actually. It's so accurate for what we deal with.
Nonetheless,
in microbiology.
Some of the people were exceedingly poor, and they could not afford not to partake of a dead animal. And so if they did, verse 40 covers them.
Right. So he, too, who eats some of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening, and the one who picks up its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean till evening. So God even provides, like, we know that he actually is omniscient, all-knowing, right? So he knows everything that has happened, and he lives outside of time, so he knows everything that's happened in our past and current and in our future. So he knows, like, they're going to mess up, or circumstances are going to dictate somehow that they have to break the rule in verse 39. So in verse 40, he says, when that happens, then you just consider yourself unclean, and again, stay away from everyone and clean yourself up until you make sure that you're not infected.
There you go. Lori says, glad to be here. So
Hey,
we're
Lori.
glad you're here too, Lori. So thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
So now he moves, the text moves on and addresses a slightly different issue.
41. Now, every swarming thing that swarms on the earth is detestable. I like that word. Not to be eaten. Detestable. Like, has your kids ever done that to you? Like, you bring dinner to the date table? Mom, that's detestable. Okay. At my house, we would have got a little smacked for that. But anyway, whatever, verse 42, whatever crawls on its belly and whatever walks on all fours, whatever has many feet, like centipedes, in regard to every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, because they are, what? Detestable. Say it with me, detestable.
Now, to clear up any confusion, whatever walks on all fours here is just scurries about, moving. It's not literally.
Right.
So because we know that sheep and goats, they walk on all fours and stuff. This is talking about swarming creatures that crawl. ants, beetles.
Yeah, so remember that word swarming?
Yeah.
In English, the translations, it's actually different Hebrew words sometimes that are
Right.
being translated swarming. So it makes it a little confusing. So
Right, because here it says whatever crawls on its belly. A better translation might be whatever slithers or
yeah,
scoots or
the
slides.
New King James says every creeping thing that creeps on earth
Yeah,
shall be an abomination, not detestable. New King James says abomination.
yeah, that's
So,
a good word too.
Abomination, like the abominable snowman. I like those words.
Right.
Detestable.
But basically, don't eat these things. Don't eat bugs. Don't eat creepy crawlies.
There's a
So-
really great song from
Yeah.
Jonah, the VeggieTales Jonah. There's a really great song about that. Don't eat bats and all this Leviticus information. I'll have to see if I can find it and like post it on Facebook or something later.
Let's
I know
read
I
the
can
next
find it.
verse.
Verse 43. That's what I think of every time I read this
I
section.
know
Like,
it
don't
is.
eat bats. Do. Okay. Do not make yourselves detestable or abominable. Is that what it says in the New King James? I don't know. Oh, in New King James it says, do not defile yourselves. Do not make yourselves detestable through any of the swarming things that swarm, and you shall not make yourselves unclean with them, so that you become unclean.
Right.
So that makes sense. So don't touch it. And then
And again, I think last week, I think it was Manny who had asked the question, is that like, well, don't locusts swarm? Yeah, we say that in English, and like we said, but remember, locusts and crickets and grasshoppers were set apart because of the differences in their
way
propulsive legs.
right, their
and their
feet is
front legs.
structured
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So yeah, actually New King James does say, do not make yourselves abominable. There you go.
Cool, there you go.
I like the word abominable.
So to summarize, which like
You're
what we started with,
summarizing.
the commentator Harris says, in general, it can be said that the laws protected Israel from bad diet, dangerous vermin, and communicable diseases. That's good enough for me. So,
Right.
So yep, want to be protected from bad diet, dangerous vermin, and communicable diseases. I'm happy to abide by that. So.
And remember the whole point of the law, and that includes all these regulations and things that God is putting forth here in Leviticus. It's all supposed to point us towards Christ and his work on the cross. I mean, the law is set up to show us all where we sin, that we are sinners. So, the dietary rituals here and the things put forth actually are wise and actually create healthier people group. Like they will stand out that they're healthy, but it also makes them stand out. Like, how can we ever keep it all? How can we never mess up?
Right.
Why do we have to spend that time away to become clean again? Because Jesus actually spent 3 days in the tomb and then rose, right? He spent 3 days away from God, he spent time away from God. He went to spend time. Why did he do that? So that he could pay the price for our sin and rise from the dead. And then he conquered our sin. So it all reflects Jesus' work.
And then to clarify and to help the Israelites see that why they're doing this, especially when they perhaps observed the people of Egypt and other things. Hey, what happened?
I just went to the OBS streaming
okay.
platform just to see, and it's not.
Okay.
Oh, it is flashing there. I thought it was not flashing there.
So
Just
in verse
curious.
44, God says this.
Verse 44, God says, "For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, because I am holy.
Boom.
There you
it
go.
is. There it is, right there.
And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth." So
Be holy, be set apart.
be holy because I am
He's
holy.
holy,
Right.
and He's the one we worship. Okay, and you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. Yes, God created them in their original form, but now the Hebrews live in, as do we, in a fallen world. And creatures that may have once had a very specific and of course useful purpose in the Garden of Eden. They have diverged from that original purpose. Think fleas and mosquitoes and flies. Okay?
Right, because of the fall, because
yeah.
of sin. Now they may they originally everything was good and did have a good purpose, but
Right.
but Satan was allowed to corrupt it.
And
once
additionally,
sin happened.
many of the surrounding pagan peoples actually worshipped these creatures as deities or messengers of the deities. So by just not even being willing to consider them for food, it's like, you know what? Yeah, we know those people over there. They worship flies, or they think flies are the messengers of their gods, little
Right.
g, their little g gods. I have nothing to do with them. So same idea. Verse 45.
For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. So you shall be holy, because I am holy.
I am holy. Yeah, just to remind them.
Right.
And then verse 46.
This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the waters and everything that swarms on the earth or scurries around, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten.
So again, when the people ask why, there it is. Because I'm
The
God,
summary paragraph there.
and this is why I want you to be set apart and holy. I want you to be a clean, ceremonially clean people, and this will protect you. So Guzik puts it this way: these laws were specifically given to the children of Israel, starting in verse 2. Second, this issue was settled once and for all at the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. There it was determined that obedience to the laws of Moses was not required of the followers of Jesus. So as Paul wrote in Colossians 2:16, let no one judge you in food or drink. Oh, I said, why did I put that in there? Because people today, are we under the law? Are we ceremonially unclean because we had a lobster dinner on our anniversary or something of that nature?
Right.
And the short answer is no.
Touch a dead carcass.
No. What?
Or we touch a dead carcass.
Oh,
or
yeah,
something.
we touch a lot of dead carcasses.
Yeah, we
yes.
touch a lot of dead things.
Yeah, so,
But we're not ceremonially
Yeah.
unclean, although.
well, we're pretty unclean.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, we
but
did it.
why? Well, now we have hand sanitizer,
Yeah.
and because we have access to.
Yeah, we actually dissected a whale once, and we were literally in the carcass of the whale. But
Yeah, you stand inside.
that's a story for another day. So, but we are not under the laws here, because Jesus made the new covenant, and his blood makes us clean.
Right.
That's why we don't have to obey those laws anymore. They fall outside of the 10 Commandments, and so the 10 Commandments still are upheld because they are moral laws. These are more ceremonial laws, and so they don't apply to modern 21st century Christians. Chapter 12.
Chapter
Woo-hoo!
12.
Look at that. We did it. We made it to chapter 12.
All right.
Although we could have probably, yeah. Okay, here we go.
Keep talking about it.
All
Go.
right.
Okay. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, when a woman gives birth and delivers a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days, as she is in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean.
Okay, so now the topic shifts from dietary laws to birth and primarily birth.
In 12, yeah.
Yeah,
Keeps
yeah,
going
yeah,
and other things.
yeah.
Now remember, we're in the section of how to live holy, or
How
how
to
to live a
holy.
holy life, or be righteous and set apart for God. So in the NLT, it actually puts the word ceremonially in front of unclean, because that is what we're talking about here. It
Right.
just says unclean for 7 days, but we are talking about that idea we just talked about a second ago, ceremonially unclean. It doesn't mean they're like cast out or whatever, but they just, and so I was thinking it's interesting, because ceremonially unclean means they are not to have anything to do with like preparing things for worship. They're not allowed to attend the worship services because they're just not allowed to be part of the ceremony of worshiping the Lord during the unclean period. Same thing applies to the food things, like I was talking about overnight. You are ceremonially unclean. So it's interesting because yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, so yeah, we don't exactly have to be like this today. However, we should be ceremonially clean when we come to worship God.
Absolutely.
I mean, you shouldn't be, like in the midst of sin and then like, okay, I'm going to stop at church and worship the Lord, right? I mean, we should, if our hearts are really to follow after God and to worship him, God is not going to be happy or pleased with that kind of worship. If we're just like pretending on the surface and in our hearts, we're not really, trying to be righteous and set apart and live a holy life. God knows that, so I was just thinking, what is your heart when you come to worship? And, like in, younger days, maybe me, maybe other people, I'm not saying, would like go out, partying on Saturday night and then go to church on Sunday. So, but like still be a little hungover, right? So if people do that, I mean, you think, well, that's ceremonially like to be righteous and ready to worship and have expectation that God would receive your worship. You should probably avoid the coming hungover part, right? Just thinking in a modern day context.
So to be clear, this chapter does not in any way, shape, or form denigrate women.
Right.
This is not an attack against women. This is not in any way demeaning motherhood or childbirth or women in general. It's actually quite revolutionary for its time in that it elevates and it protects the birth process and the surrounding recovery time and the bonding, that maternal bonding period. And so keep that in mind. And I think I have a couple of commentators in the text also that elaborate on that. But we just want to be straight up clear from the get-go. This is not negative towards women in general.
Right. This section is not in any way to be used as like, well, women are second-class citizens or women are unclean more than men. I mean, God is just putting things in place to protect.
Literally
protect the mom and the baby, really.
No credible academic or commentator thinks that these verses in chapter 12 are demeaning towards women.
I mean, even Calvary Chapel, Damien Kyle said the same thing. Yep.
So after there's let me go back. So for unclean, if a male child is born, the woman is considered ceremonially unclean for 7 days. Then on the 8th day, kaboom.
8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. So this is the baby God is telling them when they should, and the boy babies, do the circumcision, and that's on day 8 after birth.
And we'll talk about that more in just a couple of verses because it
goes on a little bit more.
It's incredibly important. So Clark puts it this way: circumcision, male circumcision, Bible never talks about female circumcision, which is akin to mutilation. Okay?
Right.
And there are some countries that practice that, and the Bible never, ever, ever advocates for that. But male circumcision, the removal of the foreskin, was not unknown in the ancient world. It was a ritual practice among various peoples. Yet for the Israelite, circumcision was to every man a constant, evident sign of the covenant into which he had entered with God, and one of the moral obligations under which he was thereby laid. So God made this practice as a obligation of all the male Hebrew peoples, again, to set them apart, and to make this as a symbol that set them apart as holy unto God. Okay.
Verse 4, and she shall stay at home in her condition of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are complete.
So not only is she unclean for 7 days, she's also clean an additional period of time, 33 days. She is to stay away from the temple, stay away from her perhaps her obligations as far as
like housework and meal preparation and all the things that the women did. So just much longer after the female child versus the male child.
And we'll see that in a minute here. And Guzik explains it so well, I'm just going to use his words. When a son was born, a mother's ceremonial uncleanliness lasted an additional 33 days, for a total of 40 days of
40 days and 40
ceremonial
nights.
impurity after giving birth to a child. There were several reasons for this, but one important reason was to give an Israelite mother an ancient equivalent to the modern day maternity leave. Did you ever think about that? So, how cool is that?
Right.
So,
But why only for the female child versus the male child?
no, you'll see.
Oh.
You'll see.
I've heard a couple things.
Yeah.
That's why I was wondering.
Here's-
The bottom line is they don't really know, is what most people say.
Here, ceremonial uncleanliness relieved her of many social obligations. Mothers welcome these days of rest, seclusion, and bonding with the newborn. Okay, so not only was it a time of her being ceremonially purified, it was also a powerful bonding time with her and her infant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now going back to circumcision. So this is really cool. Okay, this has been shown through several studies, but
The graph's a little small. Do you want me to make it big?
yeah,
for a
let's
minute?
go ahead and make that bigger.
For a minute so you can see the whole
Ooh,
screen and see
there
the
we
graph
go.
a bit better.
So it is known that vitamin K is significant in clotting. It's a significant component of clotting, blood clotting. And it's known that if the baby was circumcised in ancient times without proper or adequate stores of vitamin K, that there was the potential for the baby to bleed out or seriously bleed. Okay, the vitamin K peaks in a newborn at 8 days of age.
So you need
Okay.
to point to it with your arrow.
Yeah, so 8 days is the optimum day for circumcision, because the highest presence of clotting factor and vitamin K is present in the boy's circulatory system. Now, with modern medicine, of course, they can give vitamin K. Things of that nature can be done to
Can we go back?
circumvent that. Yeah, let's go back. Okay. So, the commentator Morgan reiterates what we talked about earlier. Motherhood is one of the most sacred and beautiful things in the whole realm of human experience. This needs no argument. But motherhood is exercised in a race which is defiled. And when he says race, he's talking about all of humanity. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Through Adam, all have sinned.
Right.
All sin.
All means all.
All means all. So when he talks about race, he's talking about the human race, which we would contend is the only race, okay, of humanity. Motherhood is exercised in a race which is defiled. When the great singer of Israel in his penitential psalm said, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity," this is King James, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me, which is Psalm 51. He was casting no reflection upon his own mother, but rather stating a racial fact or a human fact from which no human being escapes. Okay, so again, this is not a condemnation of motherhood. This is a condemnation of fallen humanity. Okay, verse 5.
Right. But if she gives birth to a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her menstruation, and she shall stay at home in her condition of blood purification for 66 days. So
Twice the time.
Yeah.
Twice the time.
Right. Twice the amount of time.
Right. On the purely physical side, it will bear close and reverent consideration, providing as it did the perfect repose of the new mother. So twice the time, so that the new mother could bond with her daughter. Okay. There's something beautiful and just wonderful in how God did that.
Right.
Okay. So verse 66. I'm sorry, verse 6.
When the days of her purification are completed for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering.
Okay, as a burnt offering towards God, and as
Remember,
a sin offering.
the burnt offering means that you are saying, Lord, I am yours, and I'm set apart. I'm wholly yours. I'm consecrating
I'm
myself.
set apart for you.
So because the burnt offering's completely consumed.
Right. And then a pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering, because again, this is a recognition that through as amazing and profound as the birth process is, it's still bringing a sinful human being into God's creation.
Right. So another sinner was born, therefore an offering to remove the sins from that individual begins right after the period of purification.
Purification, right. So this was a fairly standard fairly standard sacrifice for atonement, holding the woman symbolically responsible for bringing another sinner into the world. The mother had to bring the lamb of the first year to be a burnt offering, marking the dedication of the child to God, just like Gay said. The mother also brought a young pigeon or turtle dove to be a sin offering, making atonement for the sin that would also be carried into the world. Okay, verse 7.
Then he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who gives birth to a child, whether a male or female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, the one as a burnt offering and the other as a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. So remember, they're taking them to the priest, and then the priest is helping, or in some cases he's doing the sacrificing of the animal, and in the burnt offering he does it, but in the sin offering the individual who brings it does the dispatching of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And we see the linkage and the involvement of the mother in the birth process, and keeping that focus on being set apart for.
Well, and it's interesting that the mother brings the offering, not the father.
Yeah.
I mean, the father's probably there too, but God's specifically talking about the mother, because the new sinner, the new person came through her body, and she is the one who brings that offering. So that's very interesting. Like so again, like it tells us God isn't saying, oh, women are less than,
Absolutely.
or because if women were second class in his eyes or unworthy of worshiping him, this whole thing would not be there about the woman bringing the child. It would be the father brings the child forth,
Right. Her offering would not be considered acceptable in God's eyes, and here it is.
So, it's another sort of point on the tally for, egalitarianism versus complementarianism.
Furthermore, verse 8 makes concession for families that were exceedingly poor.
Right.
And they could not afford a lamb, even a lamb. They could not afford that. They could still do the right things, but their offering would be less. Now, the astute amongst us, which includes all of you, should be thinking right now, should be thinking like, hey, wait a minute.
I know it mentions.
I know where this is mentioned, and yes, you are right. In Luke, Jesus' family only offered a pair of turtle doves at his birth, which gives us an indication of their social status and their financial status, right? This shows that Jesus did not come from a wealthy family. It also means that the wise men who gave costly gifts to Jesus had not yet visited the family of Jesus. So, because remember, this had to be done at least 40 days after the birth process. Mm-hmm. So, as lovely and as delightful as our nativity scenes are, they're a little bit inaccurate.
Right.
Okay.
Right. They couldn't have had all those visitors right after it was born.
Right. They're a little bit inaccurate.
Because he was in the unclean period.
Right. So,
right.
Nonetheless, it shows us that our Savior can commiserate. He understands our poverty. He understands us in all of our situations. Meyer puts it this way: what a glimpse into our Master's humiliation. Okay, and here humiliation means humbleness, not degradation. It does in a sense, because God emptied himself to become a human being. But I love this comment. He owned the cattle on 1,000 hills yet so emptied himself that his parents were compelled to bring the poorest offering the law allowed. He stooped that we might rise, emptied himself that we might be full, became poor that we might be made rich, was made human that we might be made divine.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's our God. That's our God. That's the God we serve. I absolutely love this quote. So,
Yeah, that's a good one. Very good.
is that it?
I just went. It just shows
Yep.
up. That's the last.
That's
one.
our last slide. Wow.
Oh, wow.
We finished early. That never happens, right?
Right?
So we started late
Yeah.
and finished early. Woo! So that's what caffeine will do for you. So,
Really? Dan had some caffeine.
But yeah, I did. So, but just dwell on that verse.
Yeah.
Or this it's not a verse. It's not a verse, but just dwell on that comment. So, thousands of years before Jesus stepped onto this planet. Now, it was known that in heaven, it was known that that day would come. But God has making provision for the people, and ultimately He's making provision for that day when Jesus is born on earth as a human being, and to live and die on our behalf.
Right.
Wow, what a God we serve!
Right.
That does it.
That does it for us. You guys pray for Carol, Dan's mom. I don't know if we probably said it last week, but she fell and her femur broke and she fell.
Yeah,
on
you gotta get the order right.
Yeah, her bone broke and then she fell, and we were home, thankfully. Thank the Lord. And but she just needs prayers for her continuing recovery and us helping to find the right facility with where she can get good care and rehabilitation for maybe another week or two, and then obviously we'll bring her back to our house when she's able to do things a little bit more independently. But just keep her in your prayers because it's a rough road that she's on. So we appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks, you guys.
I don't know if Catherine Coleman's on board, but
Thank you.
John's
Thank
birthday
you.
was yesterday, so happy birthday to
Oh.
John. So
Yeah, happy birthday to
yeah.
John. That's awesome.
Anyway, so we will see you all next Thursday right here.
That's-
Chapter 13.
Right, Lord willing. And if you're local, we're going to do the takeover, run the service at the 5 o'clock
Oh,
church
yeah. Oh,
here in
yeah.
Westminster. So if you're local and you want to come, join us. We'd love it. I'm going to lead worship, and Dan's going to wear all the hats, like running sound and then being the preacher and then
Oh, but
running sound.
we're actually preaching on Sunday morning, too.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
preaching on
you're
Sunday
preaching
morning.
on Sunday morning at the
At
Light.
the Light in Long Beach. If
at
you want,
9:30.
just text us for that information.
Yeah, it's at California Heights Baptist Church in
right?
the Fellowship
and then
Hall.
at 5 o'clock here in Westminster, we'll be preaching again.
Right.
So
Morning church is 9:30 a.m.
I should say I. When I say we, it sounds so arrogant, like the royal we.
Well,
Gay will be leading service, but I'll be doing the preaching. But Gay's going to be right there next to me, so
Oh.
we are going to be.
Yeah,
leading
I
service.
already said that for 5 o'clock. I
Yeah.
said that. I'm leading worship, and you're going to wear hats,
Yeah.
remember?
Okay. When I said we'll be preaching. it
Oh,
sounds
we'll
like-
be preaching. Well, sometimes we co-preach, so that's why I
Sometimes.
just correct you, because we're not co-preaching.
Yeah.
Unless, except for, I preach when I'm talking in between the songs and also.
Right. So this discussion will continue
So,
long after the camera.
sometimes I forget to.
We'll see you later.
I forget to do announcements, but All right, guys.
Good night, all.
Have a good
Blessings.
rest of your week.
Blessings to you.
Love you guys.
Love you too.
Bye.